He's called a truth teller by some, a traitor by others. Scott Ritter has challenged presidents, questioned wars, and exposed uncomfortable truths, no matter the fallout. Now he's back. And his take on Hamas, Israel, Trump, and Iran. It's as explosive as ever. Love him or hate him, Ritter never holds back.
So the EU has said that they're going to dedicate several billions to building their own military defense, finally. Do you think that the EU army that they're planning to build would be sufficient or can sufficiently arm themselves against Russia aggression?
Well, first of all, I would say that there is no real threat from Russia worthy of the EU expending this much money and effort. That the best way to deal with whatever differences exist between the EU and Russia is diplomatically, and I would recommend that Europe choose that path. But this isn't just about going through the motions of creating a European military. This is about sending a signal to the United States that Europe would be prepared to go it alone should the United States withdraw from NATO. So I think there's a couple games being played here. Let's just be frank about this. There's no way that Europe is going to build a combat-capable military overnight. This isn't about money. This is about infrastructure. This is about defense industry. This is about domestic policy. This is about sustainability. This isn't something. This isn't going out and just buying a puppy at the store. This is about raising the puppy, feeding the puppy, et cetera. And Europe's not prepared to do that, and they're not geared to do that. Europe doesn't have a real world military mindset. Europe is not. The European armies are not conditioned to be expeditionary in nature. They are militaries that function from a barracks type mentality. Their training is not sufficient to prepare them for the realities of high intensity conflict of the sort that you find in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. So there will be no quick fix to this. If Europe was to be able to pull this off, it would have to be part of a strategic objective that would take many years, perhaps more than a decade, to pull off.
Could NATO survive without the U.S.?
No, NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and without the United States, there is no North Atlantic component. Moreover, we provide not just the funding, the majority of the. When I say majority of the funding, look, other people contribute money too as well, but we make things happen with our money. Our money is used to bring NATO together. Our money helps NATO helps NATO prepare or be capable of carrying out joint training exercises. Our money improves the communications capacity of NATO. We have the best intelligence service in the world, military intelligence. We bring that to bear with our money. So you pull this, NATO doesn't have the capacity to match that which they would lose. And the other thing is we are the only combat-capable forces that exist in NATO, capable of fighting in a sustained fashion in high-intensity conflict. And even there, we aren't as good as we should be because we have spent the better part of the last 2 decades focused on low-intensity conflict as opposed to preparing for high-intensity conflict. But the United States military, is the most capable military in NATO. And if you remove that, then NATO, goes from, a team that could play in the NFL to a team that couldn't play in Pop Warner. NATO just isn't a serious military alliance without the United States.
So do you believe the current situation in Ukraine war? I mean, Trump's been pushing for a peace deal. For the first time ever, he's sending envoys to Russia to have a conversation since the invasion. How do you see it playing out, the Ukraine and Russia conflict right now?
Well, the first thing we have to note is that Russia didn't ask for the United States to intervene. Russia has been engaged in responding to a conflict that was thrust upon it by the West, the expansion of NATO, the deliberate arming of Ukraine from 2015 until 2022, building a NATO-style military for the sole purpose of fighting the Russians. The bottom line is, Russia was compelled to go down this route of becoming militarily involved, and now that they've done this, they aren't going to stop until they achieve the objectives that they set out to achieve. And there is no
What do you believe
negotiation.
the objectives are?
Pardon?
Sorry. What do you believe the objectives are?
Well, it's not what I believe the objectives are. It's what Russia has stated the objectives to be. And that's, again, one of the fundamental problems here is that the United States and others feel that they can come in and change the objectives on behalf of Russia through a negotiating process. You can't. The objectives are Ukraine will never be a member of NATO, ever. The objectives are the demilitarization of Ukraine. Again, I point out that NATO has been arming and training Ukraine since 2015 to build an army for the sole purpose of fighting the Russians. That army will cease to exist. It can either do so on the battlefield or on the negotiating table, but that army will not be allowed to be retained by Ukraine. And denazification, that is to eliminate this poison of extreme Ukrainian nationalism, the ideology of Stepan Bandera, the hero of Ukraine, will be eliminated in the same way that the ideology of Adolf Hitler was eliminated from German society in the aftermath of the Second World War. These are non-negotiable. Russia will not accept anything. Now, these are broadly stated objectives, which means that the specifics on how these will be accomplished will be left up to Russia and nobody else. I want to remind people that to the victor go the spoils. And Russia is winning this war and will win this war. That's one of the reasons why the United States is seeking a negotiated end, because Donald Trump understands that this is headed on a trajectory that's unsustainable on the part of the United States, Europe, and Ukraine. And left to its own devices could lead to a nuclear conflict between the United States and Russia if the United States were to accelerate its support to Ukraine beyond that which we've already provided. And now there's a fourth reality that has injected itself, and that is Russian territorial acquisitions. In the fall of 2022, Russia held referendum in four territories: Kherson, Zaporizhia, Lugansk, and Donetsk. And as a result of these referendum, the people decided they wanted to be part of Russia, and Russia has incorporated these four territories into Russia. They are now constitutionally part of Russia, and Russia has said that these territories will be part of Russia. This non-negotiable. The totality of these territories, Ukraine will have to leave every square inch of these territories. This is the reality, and somehow the Trump administration is under the perception that they have some leverage over Russia, that somehow they've identified the Achilles heel of Russia, that if they just put pressure on that, Russia will fold like a house of cards. I think the exact opposite. Russia is very determined in this. There will be no yielding. Russia is willing to go as far as it takes. Russia views this conflict as an existential conflict, one that if they lose would mean the end of Russia. And remember, it's not Russia that defined it that way. It's we, the United States, when we said that we are seeking to achieve the strategic defeat of Russia through Ukraine. Strategic defeat. That means economic collapse, military defeat, and the demise of the Russian government. This is an existential conflict, and Russia isn't going to accept anything other than total victory. And right now, they're well on their way to getting the total victory they are seeking.
So, you've stated that, Ukraine isn't going to get back the territory and probably will have to concede more. But Trump, that Putin really wants to be part of the bigger world stage. They've admitted, the administration has admitted on Putin's side, that they feel that they deserve a place at the table, which means probably the G8. It means, rejoining kind of the Western alliances. In an interview with Lavrov like a month ago, he stated that, Russia has more aligned with the West than they do with the East. So with the Trump administration coming in, do you feel that there are some carrots that can be put out there to bring Putin to the table and actually have a semi-positive result and resolution from this because of those carrots that seem to be, something that they want?
None of the carrots you mentioned represent existential issues to Russia. First of all, let me correct the record. Russia has stated straight up they don't want to be part of the G8. They were part of the G8. They were disinvited, and that was the fatal mistake of the G8. Russia's part of something bigger and better than the G8 called BRICS, and that's the direction that Russia has gone. And Russia understands that the close alignment it had with the West prior to February 2022, was a weakness for Russia. It allowed the West to believe that they could sanction Russia into submission. And Russia has reversed that weakness. They have strengthened themselves by divorcing themselves from being so interwoven with the Western economy. The Russian economy today is booming, stronger than ever, because they have liberated themselves from the West. So to think that you're luring Russia to the table by getting them to allow the West to come back into the Russian economy and have the leverage that they had over Russia in the past is absurd in the extreme. The Russians have made it very clear that even if normalized relations take place, they're not going to undo what they have done to let Western companies come back in willy-nilly. The West lost its opportunity. The West betrayed Russia. And so Russia is not going to sit there and say, well, come back in and reestablish that which you had in the past. Russia doesn't need it. There's no carrots that Trump has that can get Russia to move away from its stated position when it comes to conflict resolution. You can't trade, economic interactivity between the United States and Russia to have Russia yield territory or allow the Nazis to continue to rule in Ukraine, knowing that in doing so, this war will be fought again in 5 years, 10 years, 20. This war is over. Russia is fighting this war so that it never again happens. They are seeking the total defeat of the Banderist ideology that has seized control in Ukraine. And there's nothing Trump can offer that gets them off of this. What Trump can do is take advantage of the goodwill that would accrue by bringing this conflict to a rapid end. See, Russia's going to end this war on its terms. That's a given. Trump can't get Russia to alter its terms. The only thing Trump can do is alter the timeline of Russian victory. Either Trump puts pressure on Ukraine and in Europe to surrender to Russia's terms, or Russia will compel them to surrender through military force. That's it. Those are the only two options. There's not going to be a negotiated middle ground. Russia already acknowledges that it is in an existential conflict with the collective West. They view this conflict in Ukraine not as a conflict between Russia and Ukraine, but a conflict between Russia, NATO, and the United States. They've already made that leap in their mind. And so the idea that Trump holds carrots that can lure, it's absurd in the extreme. Trump has no carrots. Russia has carrots.
Lavrov and Putin have said that there is more in common with the West than the East. So they have made that statement on numerous occasions. It's not just Lavrov. It's Putin has said it, like the Christian collective, the common sense is returning to the United States. There's more of a conservative movement, especially with Trump in office. Now, while yes, there was this mindset under Biden, I do agree that Russia had this very strong, it was the West against us. Is they're not, especially now that they're entertaining these conversations and this dialogue with the Trump administration, is there not hope that there can be not just a rapid conclusion, but also some kind of anything? I mean, has that position not changed because of the Trump administration at all, or is it still the West versus Russia, and Russia's going to align with China and Iran and BRICS and the whole thing on that side?
Well, first of all, Russia is aligned with China and Iran and BRICS.
No, I know. But I'm saying, is that forever? Is that going to be forever, or is there hope that in the future that there would be more of an alignment with Russia and the U.S.?
I think what the Russians have been saying is that they believe that under Donald Trump, the United States may be changing the fundamental direction of U.S.-Russian relations, and that Russia would be willing to go along with this. But Russia's not going to yield on any of the existential issues before them when it comes to Ukrainian conflict. The prospect of U.S.-Russian relations is what isn't fundamental. It's sort of a nice to have. Russia can live without the United States. That's
What can Russia not live without?
Russia cannot live without an independent. Understand that the United States and Europe, ever since Vladimir Putin came into power on New Year's Eve, 1999, promising to raise Russia out of the ashes of the disaster that was imposed on Russia by the United States, by Europe, through Boris Yeltsin. He said, "We will never tolerate this again," and he has stood Russia up on its feet. Russia will never allow to be brought back to their knees. Russia is Russia. Russia's not trying to be a competitor on the world stage to the American hegemon. Russia's not looking for hegemonic domination over, anybody. Russia does have legitimate national security interests on their near abroad, and they won't let the United States come in and seek to sow chaos in the southern Caucasus or in Central Asia. Would Russia like to be aligned with the West? I mean, Russia understands that it is a Western nation, but that doesn't mean that they surrender to the West. Are they willing to live peacefully in coexistence with the West? Yes, of course. Do they find themselves more aligned with a conservative America that embraces the kind of traditional family values that Russia espouses to, religion-based, etc.? Sure, that'd be a nice to have, but it's not essential. Russia has already divorced itself from the United States and from Europe. They can live without America. They can thrive without America, and they are thriving without America. And as long as the United States continues to behave as the global hegemon, Russia will continue to find solace in its relationship with China. I just want to remind people that on May 9th, it's the 80th anniversary of Victory Day. This was an opportunity where the United States could have had a delegation there, seated next to their Russian allies, because they're celebrating the Allied victory over Nazi Germany. Instead, because of Trump not being able to follow through on his initial outreach to Russia about a Ukraine peace deal, because the Russians have laid out their terms. It's not as though the Americans are saying, "Oh, we don't know what the Russians want." The Russians have laid out their terms absolutely. It's Trump's inability to follow on that, to accomplish any meaningful resolution that would satisfy Russia's terms. And so on May 9th, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, will be the guest of honor. Not just the guest of honor, he's coming as part of a full state visit with all the pomp and circumstances. And this is a signal to the United States that Russia is committed to this relationship. The Russian-Chinese relationship is solid gold. Because there's many people that believe that the United States can exploit this new era of friendship with Russia to drive a wedge between Russia and China. You would have to be as ignorant as the day is long to believe that. Russia doesn't trust us, doesn't trust the United States. Why should they? And they're not going to, even if we establish normalized diplomatic relations. Russia's not going to trust us until we earn that trust. We have broken every agreement that we've ever entered into Russia, withdrawn from arms control treaties, negotiated in bad faith. The Russians don't forget this. So neither Putin nor Lavrov nor anybody in the Russian government are going to make concessions of a fundamental nature just to have better relations with the United States and Europe. Would they like to have better relations with the United States? Absolutely. But they're not going to sacrifice that which they have accomplished. Russia will never bend the knee. Russia will never go backwards. Russia will never again find itself to be the broken nation governed by a drunken, idiot named Boris Yeltsin. They have Vladimir Putin in there. And whether you like him or not, it doesn't matter. You have to acknowledge that this man has ruled Russia with a solid hand for 25 years, and that the Russia today is a far different country than the Russia he inherited in 1999.
It's interesting that you mentioned May, because it was just announced that Trump is going to be in the Middle East and meeting with the new head of Syria in May. It was just announced today. Russia had quite a big role in Syria in the past, and then they have since shrunk their presence, and also because of the new leadership there. Just to kind of pivot a little bit to that and Russian influence in other parts of the world. But your perspective on Syria would be really interesting to see. I mean, the current new president that's in place seems to be being embraced by the West a bit. Not so much with Russia, but definitely with Turkey and some of the Western countries.
Well, the
Do
man
you
you
think it's
call the
going to
president of
translate?
Syria,
Hmm?
al-Jolani, is
Hmm.
al-Qaeda. The concept of
Former.
an American
Okay.
president meeting with a senior al-Qaeda official is disgusting. Al-Qaeda attacked the United States on 9/11. Have we forgotten this? Al-Qaeda has been singing death to America for decades. Al-Qaeda is the most despicable organization on the planet. We should be killing these people, not embracing these people. I don't know what's going through Donald Trump's mind. I don't understand why he believes he can condition the American people into seeing Jolani as anything other than the head-chopping son of a bitch that he is. So I don't know what he's doing. But again, let's just compare the two meetings. In May, Vladimir Putin is going to be meeting Xi Jinping, two of the most powerful men in the world, in a state visit that's going to solidify a relationship that's going to define the next century. Donald Trump's going to be meeting with al-Qaeda. The contrast between those two is stunning. What's Russia's role in all this? Look, Russia intervened in 2015 to bring stability to Syria in the aftermath of 4 years of CIA-driven, anti-Assad activity, where the black flag of Islamic extremism almost flew over Damascus. The Russians intervened to prevent that, and they succeeded. They reversed the tide, and by 2020 they had brought stability to Syria. The Assad regime was once again solidly ensconced in power. And the Russian job at that time was to facilitate not only that stability, but also to help Syria gain control over the totality of its sovereign territory. Between 2020 and December of last year, the Syrian government was not up to the task, and we have seen a collapse of unprecedented swiftness. I still don't believe that anybody truly knows exactly what happened. There's a lot of speculation there, but the idea that Bashar al-Assad, backed up by Russia and Iran, collapsed as rapidly as he did. The rapidity in which HTS, which is this al-Qaeda affiliate where Jolani governs, was able to take Aleppo, then Hama, then Homs, and then Damascus. I have yet to see someone explain how this happened exactly. A lot of speculation, but the specifics still are unknown. And I think the Russians are in the same position as everybody else, trying to figure out what the hell happened. How did this happen?
Well, a lot of people believe Turkey was involved, and now Turkey, Israel has been threatening to build bases, and Turkey has been threatening or promising to expand their presence and their military presence in Syria to stabilize things. I mean, there's been a lot of flare-ups and unrest and killings across the country, especially with the minorities in Syria. But a lot of people are looking at this as though Iran has lost a big partner inside of Syria, and Russia has lost kind of their holding of that country. Is there what's the future going to look like? Because Syria was the conduit to feed Hezbollah. It was the conduit to feed Hamas in a lot of ways, weapons and stuff from Iran. Is there going to be a vacuum there? Is the West going to come in because Israel's moving forward more and more into Syria, and then they're doing more bombings and such? What are your thoughts?
I think Syria is going to be condemned to a future of chaos and anarchy and violence and death. Nothing good's going to happen in Syria. It's fracturing as a nation state. As you mentioned, these al-Qaeda terrorists are killing Alawites, killing Shia, killing Christians, because that's what they do. They're killing Sunnis who don't conform to their strict, in some people would say, incorrect interpretation of Islam. Russia's interests have to be re-examined, and I'm sure Russia's doing that. Russia didn't intervene in 2015 to inject itself into the Mediterranean Sea. It was an intervention to stabilize the situation in Syria to keep Bashar al-Assad, a close ally, in power. Assad's no longer there, and so Russia's reassessing what its role can be. But we have a changing world. You say Turkey was involved. We know Turkey helped create HTS, funded it, helped recruit, and guided its operations. But Turkey had its own government in exile. HTS victory took Turkey by surprise as well. And Turkey has been responding ever since, trying to play catch up. I don't think there was ever a scenario where Turkey thought that the black flag of ISIS and al-Qaeda would fly over Damascus, as opposed to the flag of the Syrian nationalist groups that it was supporting. But we do see Syria moving in now. They are moving air defense forces into Syrian air bases in order to confront Israel, which has been basically using Syria as a bombing range. And this could lead to a direct conflict between between Turkey and Israel in Syria. I don't think Russia wants to be in the middle of that. Russia does, the Russians right now are reevaluating their position. Syria was never of an existential nature for Russia, meaning that Russia could have cut and left Syria at any time and not suffered the kind of consequences it would have suffered had it cut in Ukraine, for instance.
Do you believe that Syria would have fallen if resources from Russia weren't tied up in Ukraine like they are?
Yeah, because how much more was Russia supposed to invest in Syria? The idea was to stabilize the Assad regime, which they accomplished. Russia wasn't going to put an armored division or army on the ground. Russia had its air force, a very limited air force presence. They had some other military assets there. But the problem for Syria is domestic political. The question is, how does Assad govern? When you look at the history of Assad, you understand he didn't want to be the president of Syria. He wanted to be a dentist, or no, an eye doctor, I believe, an ortho. Yeah. He was thrust into this role when his elder brother, died in a car accident. He became the president in 2000. Immediately he inherited a regime that he recognized as being fundamentally corrupt. He attempted reforms, but was blocked in those reforms by the domestic political realities associated with drought and famine. He had to rely upon the governmental institutions he was seeking to reform to keep himself in power during this time. And then as soon as the drought ended, we have the Arab Spring, and suddenly we have the foreign intelligence services of a number of nations, including the United States, facilitating uprisings in Syria, where once again, rather than doing the necessary reforms that would change the corrupt nature of the Syrian regime, he had to rely upon these governors and these generals to survive. The Iranians came in and provided assistance. The Russians came in and provided assistance, but it's primarily military assistance. When the war ended, both Russia and Iran put Assad on notice that he will have to make some fundamental changes, that it's the system he has in place is not sustainable. Assad was unwilling to make those changes. Instead, Assad turned to the Arab League, and rather than reforming his military or reforming the system of governance, he turned to the Arab League, who started pouring money into Syria. And I think money is the root of all evil, and I think the Arab League money ended up buying off a number of Syrian generals and Syrian governors and such, so that when the time came for the Syrian army to fight and die for Syria, they just disappeared. And there's no amount of Russian military aid that could have prevented that from happening. Syria was corrupt from inside. It wasn't about Russia not providing enough resources. It was about Syria being unable to sustain a fundamentally corrupt system of government.
So, it's a perfect answer. Thank you very much. I appreciate the history and the background because it gives good context. I'm curious because Israel's Israel's the proxy for the U.S. in a lot of ways in the Middle East, and so they're battling Syria in a lot of ways right now to try and stop any kind of uprising or potential military activation there. They've already been bombing Hezbollah for the last year. In your opinion, do you think they've squashed that threat sufficiently enough for them? Is Hezbollah still active? In your opinion, is it still something that should be of concern? Is there hope for, Lebanon to move past it or have peace?
Back in the 1990s, I spent 4 years serving as the liaison between the United Nations and Israeli intelligence, working on issues related to Iraq weapons of mass destruction. But I became very familiar with Israeli intelligence. I met a lot of people, and from the heads of intelligence on down. And one of the people that I met was the person responsible for doing the national assessments, the threat assessments. And I was curious from the standpoint of, how Israel factored in the disarmament process that was ongoing in Iraq into its threat assessment related to Iraq. A lot of people don't realize that after the Gulf War in 1991, Israel viewed Saddam Hussein's continued existence to be an existential issue for Israel, and that they actually tried to assassinate him in 1992. The assassination failed in rehearsal and all this, but the point is, Iraq was of such a threat that they were trying to kill Saddam Hussein. But by the time we began working with the Israelis, and then a couple years in, Iraq wasn't deemed to be a fundamental threat to Israel anymore because we had brought their weapons of mass destruction programs under control, etc. And so I was happy to see Iraq go from one of the top threats down the list. That meant that our work was succeeding. But I was curious as to what the number one threat to Israel was in the mind of this man who's responsible for doing the threat assessments. And it wasn't Iran, it was Israel. Israel was the number one threat to Israel. The extreme orthodoxy, the extreme right wing. Israel was going through a period of time where they were bringing in hundreds of thousands of Jewish refugees from Russia and Ukraine in the collapse of the Soviet Union, absorbing them. These were people who were that had no connectivity to the Middle East, and they were prone to be extremely anti-Arab, extremely anti-Palestinian, and they empowered the radical right. And the threat was from here, the domestic threat. This guy said that left unchecked, these people will be the end of Israel. And the reason why I bring that up is that this is a statement that was made in 1998. If you look today, the statement coming out of Israel from many former prime ministers, former generals, is just that Benjamin Netanyahu is an extreme right-wing government is the greatest threat to Israel that exists today. So I want to put that in perspective here, because when we talk about, that which can destroy the Israeli nation, Israel's the greatest threat to Israel. As we speak, Netanyahu's under tremendous pressure. He's being pursued by the courts, pursued by Shin Bet and others, and his continued hold on power is not guaranteed at all. Israel is fundamentally divided. The president of Israel, before October 7th, 2023, back when hundreds of thousands of Israelis were demonstrating in the streets in opposition to the proposed judicial reforms that were being pursued by Benjamin Netanyahu, he said that Israel is on the cusp of a civil war, not civil unrest, not, civil disobedience, a civil war where Jew will shoot Jew, Jew will fight Jew. And nothing has changed. It's only gotten worse. So Israel's in a very, very difficult situation now. So if you understand that, now you start layering over the different external threats. First of all, this will be a little controversial, but I'll say, Hamas beat Israel. If you think anything other than that, you're not a military person. And the Israeli military admits this. They've just put out their own internal study that says on October 7th, Hamas strategically defeated Israel. It was a strategic military victory by Hamas over an ill-prepared Israel. And in the 15 months that followed, Israel did not defeat Hamas because the Israeli objectives were stated as the physical destruction of Hamas. And what we saw when the hostages were being released is that thousands of Hamas fighters who should have been dead were in the streets wearing uniforms and parading. They weren't defeated at all, not even close. What was defeated was Israel. Their military was unable to accomplish the military task, and politically, Israel destroyed its reputation globally. Again, let's put things in perspective. In September of 2023, Joe Biden was at the G20 meeting, I believe, in New Delhi, in India, where he announced the India-Middle East Economic Corridor, this idea that you would somehow connect India through the United Arab Emirates, through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, into Israel, and on to Europe. Benjamin Netanyahu came out that same day and gave a speech where he said, this is the most important event to happen in modern Israeli history. Now, why would he say that? This is the most important event because, and people lose sight of this, Israel doesn't function logically. It's an illogically functioning nation because most nations can't succeed to live in a neighborhood where everybody's their enemy, surrounded by enemies. It's very difficult to succeed economically, and ultimately James Carville, his 1992 admonition to Bill Clinton, it's the economy, stupid. It's the best advice anybody can give. It's all about the economy, and it's always about the economy. And Netanyahu understood that Israel was not positioning itself to survive economically, that they had to change the paradigm. This is what was behind the Abraham Accords that Donald Trump sought to implement in his first term. And so what Netanyahu was saying is now Israel will now, through this, become thoroughly integrated into the regional economy, that it will be up there working with the Saudis, working with the Gulf Arab states, working with the neighbors as an equal. And when you do that, and Israel now stop being this little poison cell and starts becoming part of the fabric, it liberates Israel. And it not only allows Israel to thrive, but it allows Israel to survive. He said it was the most important thing to happen in modern Israeli history. Well, on October 7th, in the Israeli reaction, the mowing of the grass, the actions that have been called genocide by the International Court of Justice, by the International Criminal Court, and by the world at large, Israel has lost its standing. Saudi Arabia will not normalize relations with Israel, nor will the Gulf Arab states, until which time there is a Palestinian state, something that Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump were conspiring through the Abraham Accords to ensure never could exist. So Israel has complicated its picture. It's no longer a nation seeking to, merge into the global community. It's become an even more entrenched nation, whose only path towards survival is through the United States. Without American assistance, American aid, Israel would cease to exist. So it's in a very precarious situation, and that's because of Hamas. And Israel's only doubling down on stupid by continuing the policies that failed it for the first 15 months of conflict, doing the same thing. What do they think is going to happen? They now have magic bombs that can kill all the Palestinians. I mean, it's crazy. Hezbollah, here Israel's had a better effect. The assassination of Hassan Nasrallah, a man who had ruled Hezbollah since 1992, and the deaths of his designated replacements, I think 2 layers down, combined with Israel's targeting of Hezbollah middle management through the exploding pagers and exploding radios, did great harm to Hezbollah. But there's 2 aspects to this. One is the damage done to Hezbollah's leadership in terms of dead and wounded. But the other is this revealed that Israel had penetrated Hezbollah to an extent unimaginable. And that's very difficult for Hezbollah to recover from. We also have a situation today where Hezbollah is more than just a resistance movement. It's a political party. It's part of the Lebanese government, and therefore it's beholden to the Lebanese people, not just the supporters of Hezbollah, to ensure that the policies that it embraces are policies that are good for the Lebanese people. Lebanon will support Hezbollah as a resistance movement. And here I think Israel's made a big mistake by continuing to occupy southern Lebanon, because all it does is provide legitimacy for the continuation of Hezbollah. But Hezbollah has to be careful, because if they engage Israel in continued conflict, Israel will punish the Lebanese population, the non-Hezbollah supporting population. And there's a risk that Hezbollah will become isolated, alienated, and eventually cut off and wither. So Hezbollah is treading very delicate political grounds here, and they don't have a Hassan Nasrallah who's been around forever to help them accomplish this task. So I do think you're going to see some hesitancy on the part of Hezbollah in terms of decisive actions, etc. But it's not a defeated organization. I just want to remind people that after Hassan Nasrallah was killed, in the days before the ceasefire kicking in, Israel sent 2 of its best units to seize hilltop villages in Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, the 7th Armored Brigade and the Golani Brigade, and they were both defeated by Hezbollah fighters. So the idea that Hezbollah is incapable of resisting, etc., is ludicrous. I just think that Hezbollah has its hands tied politically because of the new reality that exists. They have to take into account the totality of Lebanese concerns, and they are a political party, not a resistance movement, and so that mitigates. The other issue is how does Iran continue to supply?
That's my question, exactly, because Hezbollah was part of its axis. I mean, you had Hezbollah, the Houthis, you had some in Syria that were part of that, and then Hamas and some of those movements as well. Like, it definitely has weakened Iran's ability to wage proxy wars, which then means that, if Iran wants to take a stance, are they going to start doing, direct attacks at some point? Is because they're threatening, they're saber rattling, and the U.S. just said very recently that they believe that Iran is within days potentially of having nuclear capabilities, and the U.S. has moved, I believe, 8 to 10 bombers into the region to be able to strike at Iran. And then just last week we had an interview with a former IDF spokesperson who hinted and kind of hummed and hawed and basically admitted that if Iran used nukes, then Israel would respond in kind. So is this the nuclear front we should be worried about? Just curious. So it's kind of like a 3-part question. One, is Iran's influence and ability to wage proxy wars diminished because of Hezbollah being defeated, the Houthis now being under massive attack by the U.S., and Hamas, being somewhat crippled at this point as well? We'll start there.
I think the loss of Syria has dealt a blow to Iran's ability to influence operations in Gaza and in Lebanon and in Syria. Remember, Iran was doing its level best to get military resources, into Syria to create an extended front against Israel. And so the fall of Syria, the collapse of Syria, look, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard says this is a strategic defeat for Iran. They acknowledge it, that Iran was strategically defeated. But that doesn't mean that that they've surrendered or that they can't do anything. The Iranians have insinuated that they have other ways to continue to support Hezbollah, and that the support will continue. I don't doubt that, but I don't think it'll ever match the support that they had when Syria was the conduit where you could freely transport material. I say freely because the Israelis were interdicting it, and so was the United States. There was a reason why Israel kept bombing Syria during this period of time, and that's because they were trying to stop Iran from providing Hezbollah with long-range missiles and precision-guided missiles. there's no doubt that the Iranians have been set back on this. Hamas, you know, like I said, the Israelis didn't defeat them in the first 15 months, and I don't see any indication that Israel is going to have any better success this time around. Hamas, you know, has shown an ability to acquire weapons and technology and survive. That doesn't mean that that will last forever. That doesn't mean that Israel, who has a very capable intelligence service, isn't going to, you know, find the solution down the road. But I don't automatically write Hamas off. They survived for 15 months, and I think that they will continue to survive. Hezbollah diminished. Pardon?
What about the protests that are happening in Gaza now, in northern Gaza, against Hamas?
I think Hamas is in a. I mean, we're dealing with human nature. People who withstood the onslaught of Israel for 15 months were given hope that this was over, and now it's not over. And I get in trouble saying this, but again, I don't care because it's what I say what I believe. I don't care what people's opinion are. I think Hamas has made a huge mistake about the hostages. I think that they've lost some of their moral standing amongst the Palestinian people. That there's no reason for Hamas to hold on to these 54 hostages anymore. They should be giving these people up and making every effort to bring an end to this conflict. The Palestinian people have suffered enough. There are governments like the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and others who are trying to work out a Gaza reconstruction plan that doesn't allow the people of Gaza to be removed, that creates the real possibility for a Palestinian state in Gaza. And I think Hamas, you know, they say pride cometh before the fall. And, you know, they've taken this uncompromising stance on the hostages, and I think it is it's hurting them. It's hurting them on a number of fronts. It's allowing Israel to claim, you know, a moral foundation for what it's doing, and it's eroding the trust and confidence that the people of Gaza had in Hamas. So I do think that there is the beginning of an erosion of the support that existed there. To the extent, go ahead.
Oops. I was just curious. So I'm assuming you're not a supporter of Trump's clear everything out and build a new beachfront villa for the world.
No, I'm a former military officer who is schooled in the laws of war, and I know that genocide and you know, the forced expulsion of civilians from their land is a war crime. So I would never support a war crime, and Trump's plan is predicated on multiple war crimes. So that's why I've said that it's not a real plan, that it's simply this extreme thing that was put out there to promote a counter-proposal. And sure enough, the Jordanians and the Egyptians came up with a counter-proposal. Marco Rubio called it that. He said, we did this, we now have a counter-proposal, now we're talking. But no, as an American military officer, I could never support the things that Donald Trump was talking about doing there. That's
You know,
criminal.
it's interesting that you talk about that extreme because you know, for 50 years, and just to throw it back to Europe a little bit, but for 50 years, presidents have been pushing Europe for trying to get them to militarize themselves and build an army. And every single president has like literally failed. And it took Trump's extreme rhetoric in a lot of ways to get them to actually even budge towards the concept of, you know, increasing their military spending and maybe even arming themselves or building an EU army or anything, because that talk was never in the works. So it's interesting because a similar tactic happened in Gaza. I mean, and you're seeing that even with the tariffs and other things, like this seems to be this ridiculous strategy and the leaders are responding to it. So it's kind of like, oh Lord, you give us all heart attacks and then come back to the middle ground kind of thing.
Well,
Is that going to be the new political, you know, geopolitical policy of the Trump administration, do you think, moving forward?
I think so. We saw that in his first term. He gave a speech at the United Nations calling North Korea a little rocket man, calling Kim Jong-un a little rocket man, and he promised them fire and fury. basically threatening nuclear war. And then next thing we know, he has 3 meetings with Kim Jong-un, unprecedented in nature, that brought us to the cusp of a denuclearization agreement between the United States and North Korea. It failed fundamentally because Trump was betrayed by 2 of his closest advisors, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, and John Bolton, the National Security Advisor. But, you know, Trump didn't meet Kim Jong-un in a vacuum. It happened because he raised the stakes. And then the meeting happened. Let's look at Iran today. You know, the Iranians have so far said that they will not respond to the maximum pressure campaign that's been put on by Donald Trump. That's a non-starter for them. You know, and that there's just no place to negotiate their nuclear program, et cetera. And I also want to set the stage. You mentioned a discussion you had with an Israeli spokesperson and talked about Iran using nuclear weapons. For Iran to build a nuclear weapon, it would have to kick IAEA inspectors out of Iran. Right now, the IAEA inspectors have a good grasp on where the Iranian enriched material is. And in order for Iran to build a bomb, they would have to divert that material to a centrifuge cascade and then to make highly enriched uranium, and that diversion would be easily detected. So it's not as though Iran's going to build a bomb in secret. And I actually believe that if Iran kicked inspectors out as they were moving to do this enrichment, that the United States would bomb Iran, and so would Israel. That Israel and the United States aren't going to wait around for Iran to get a nuclear bomb, because, with all due respect to that spokesperson, 3 to 5 nuclear weapons detonated over Israel eliminates Israel forever. Kills everybody in it, and you can't live there. You may have some counterstrike capacity on submarines that you'll seek your revenge, but it would be the end of Israel. And Israel knows this, which is why they're never going to allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. And what we have right now is Iran is a nuclear threshold state. They are on the threshold of having nuclear weapons capability, but in order to achieve it, they would have to use material that's carefully safeguarded by the International Atomic Energy Agency. But what's interesting is that Trump has threatened war. And he's put it all out. And again, I've gotten in a lot of trouble for just stating the reality. Trump is going to bomb Iran. And if he bombs Iran, it's not going to be a Houthi-type bombing campaign, which is limited scope and scale, designed to deter. It will be a nation-ending exercise. We know this because Trump has been down this road before. If you recall, in his first term, the Iranians shot down an RQ-4 Global Hawk drone over the Strait of Hormuz. They claimed that it veered into Iranian space. Trump was threatening retaliation to bomb air defense sites on Iranian territory. And he was told by the Pentagon, if you do that, the Iranians will retaliate, and then we'll work our way up the escalation ladder until all oil facilities in the Middle East are destroyed. And then it will take us, many months, if not several years, to build up the military power necessary to come in and defeat Iran, if we could defeat Iran. One of the big problems that we faced was our conventional bombs could not destroy Iran's underground nuclear facilities. So that if we began a military campaign against Iran, their nuclear facilities would survive, and in surviving would be able to build nuclear bombs. And I just will tell you, I was somebody who was heavily involved in the counter-Scud campaign during the first Gulf War. We didn't kill a single Iraqi mobile missile launcher or destroy any Iraqi missiles. And I will tell you right now, in Yemen against the Houthi, we're not destroying much either. We're bombing a lot of facilities, but the Houthi have had 10 years to learn how to hide their materials. They're very good. Notice they continue to launch rockets against Israel, and they continue to launch rockets against the ships. We don't have the ability to stop that using the tools and techniques that we're using right now. But our campaign against the Houthi is not a nation-ending campaign. Our campaign against Iran, I believe, would be a nation-ending campaign, because we understand that we have to destroy everything up front. Iran has 5,000 missiles that they're ready to rain down on Israel, as they proved in True Promise 2. They can hit Israel. The Iron Dome will not defend Israel. And so, we need to take those missiles out. We need to take out the nuclear facilities. We need to take out their command and control. We need to collapse Iran. So a military campaign that Donald Trump is threatening is a nation-ending campaign. But that's a statement of fact. I don't want that to happen. I'm just saying that that's the campaign that's being promised. And what's interesting about that is I think the Iranians finally woke up to the reality that if they continue to go down this path, it's over, lights out. And that's why Iran now, again, Trump sent a letter to the Iranian leadership, to the Ayatollah Khamenei, which was very forceful. And the Iranians responded in a very negative way. Trump has softened his posture now. He put out a statement the other day which opened the door for indirect negotiations using a third party. And the Iranians have nibbled. And so the Iranians now are talking about how they can engage in negotiations. And at the end of the day, what one would hope would happen is that through these indirect negotiations, the Iranian nuclear program can be brought under a semblance of control that meets mollifies the concerns of Israel and the United States in terms of Iran being a nuclear breakout state, to bring some sort of control over the breakout window that would exist, and we can avoid a war. But Iran would never have gone to the negotiating table had Trump not taken it to this extreme. So we're back to, what we've talked about in the other examples. Trump comes in with this just ridiculous position that has everybody just angry because how can you? But in the end, it achieves results that have never been achieved by any other president. How do you get NATO members to go to 5%? Well, you threaten to pull out of NATO. And Trump didn't just say it; he did it. He defunded American funding of the civil, the civil aspects of NATO. He pulled America out of planning for military exercises for the next year. NATO can't run military exercises without the Americans helping plan. They can do little things, but they can't do the big scale stuff. So he did serious things. It has Europe going, oh my God, what? And now suddenly you have Marco Rubio in NATO saying, no, America wants NATO, but you've got to go to 5%. And you got Europe saying we can go to 5% because nobody wants, that extreme solution to be implemented. The problem with Trump's programs, though, is that it's very risky. What happens if somebody calls the bluff? Is Trump willing to do what is necessary? I mean, if you're threatening something, what happens when somebody calls you bluff? And I think he's going to find out on Russia. Getting back to bringing this around. Trump is threatening Russia. These, he knows Putin's weakness, and Putin knows that he knows this weakness, and I'm going to sanction your oil, and I'm going to do that. And the Russians could care less. The Russians aren't going to yield. They have a better understanding of their, oil industry and how they sell oil than anybody else. And one of the goals of Trump would be to divide Russia from China by threatening secondary sanctions. Well, how does that work when Xi Jinping shows up on May 9th as with a state visit? So I think on the issue of Russia, Trump needs to be careful because Russia is calling his bluff. They're saying, we told you what we want. Russia's the one dictating the terms. And so it'll be interesting. We have Kirill Dmitriev coming to Washington. He's sort of the counterpart of Steve Witkoff, who was Trump's go-to guy to begin this rapprochement with Russia, a very close advisor to Trump, somebody Trump trusts. And he and Dmitriev met in Moscow and began this thing. So Dmitriev's here talking to, I believe, Witkoff and others. And I think he's trying to chart a path forward. But the reality is, this is a very dangerous game that Trump's playing. We can look at this whole tariff thing. I'm not an economist, so I'm loath to talk about the economy because I don't want to have anybody think that I know anything about what I'm talking about, because I don't. But it just seems to be a very extreme gesture designed to achieve an outcome that many people say will be very disruptive to the American economy and Donald Trump's political fortunes. But is this a gambit? Is he going in, doing this, and then he'll pull the tariffs back when he gets the results from other nations? For instance, Vietnam and Cambodia, their economies are going to tank. So maybe he'll get them to make some adjustments in other countries too. So I think this is Donald Trump's way. He comes in with, the big dramatic, controversial plan, but the purpose is to get the other side off of their position that otherwise they never would have gotten off of. If you had come at them through normal diplomacy, etc., they would have waited you out, said no, because there's no consequence. But by making the consequence clear, he tends to get movement in the direction that he wants to go. It's controversial. It's not the way I do business, but my name isn't Donald Trump, so
China is the biggest player right now. Besides Russia, China's the next biggest player that he's kind of pushing the envelope with. Like, they have stated clearly that by 2030, there's going to be a reunification of Taiwan. The U.S. has a very strict kind of stance in some ways. They have a lot of money invested in it, although they are divesting from Taiwan and building their own chip plants here stateside. So I'm curious, like, will these extreme threats or extreme positions that Trump is taking work with the president of China, or is it going to be similar to what's happening with Russia, in your opinion?
I think Donald Trump will find that China is every bit resistant to these bullying tactics as Russia is. China is actually in the driver's seat in many of these issues. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, I always find it curious that, he said before Trump was elected that, he said, I've sat in on the war games at the Pentagon, and I know what happens every time we try to fight China over Taiwan. We lose. We don't have the military capacity to win. And so, one of the things that Trump has been talking about is disentangling ourselves from Europe, disentangling ourselves from the Middle East, being able to pivot over to the Pacific to have more capacity in the Pacific. But this will take time. But now that he is the Secretary of Defense, there's some very bellicose commentary come out of him about how we're going to defend Taiwan. Well, last time I checked, the United States has a one China policy, which means that we agree that Taiwan is part of China. But we want to make sure that the integration takes place in a way that's respectful of the people of Taiwan. But at the end of the day, a one China policy means just that, a one China policy. And what it appears is that Trump continues the same political gamesmanship that has existed since the creation of the one China policy, which is we say one China, but we actually support Taiwanese independence. But we can't do that directly because we have this agreement that's supposed to mollify the Chinese. China's not playing that game. They won't allow an independent Taiwan, and they are prepared now to do what is necessary to ensure that Taiwan will always be part of China. They would prefer to do this peacefully, but they're willing and able to use military force. And as Pete Hegseth knows, that once China commits the military force to defeat Taiwan, there's nothing the United States can do about it short of a general nuclear exchange, which is not, I don't believe, is the direction the United States would go, at least initially. So, I think it's ridiculous for us to be talking about military confrontation with China. It's counterproductive, and it could just lead to embarrassment. We should be talking about, if we want to confront China, it should be economic confrontation designed to try to level the playing field. And we see, to give you an example, the Panama Canal. There's two ports there. They aren't part of the canal proper, but they're ports through which much of the shipping goes through. And these were owned by a Hong Kong company. And Trump, working with BlackRock, engineered a deal where BlackRock would buy, I think it's 40 ports in 23 countries, including these two ports. But what's interesting, most of the ports that they're buying are ports that were part of the Belts and Roads Initiative, which is China's big infrastructure, global infrastructure plan that gives China the inside track on supply chains and things of that nature. And here you have a situation where BlackRock is going in and trying to erode the Belts and Roads Initiative. And I think we've just seen what the future of the conflict between the United States and China will be, that we are going to seek to dismantle Belts and Roads Initiative, especially in the Pacific Theater, to assert American economic control over various places, and to try and compete with the Chinese in terms of supply chains and protect our own supply chains, etc. So I think that's the nature of the conflict. It's going to be an economic conflict. The degree to which it will involve tariffs, again, I'm not an economist, so I can't speak to the value of a tariff war with China. But I do believe that since that seems to be the tool that Trump is buying onto, that we are going to see a tariff war, trade war with China. But we have to be careful because China, I believe, can collapse the American economy quicker than America can collapse the Chinese economy. I don't think China wants to collapse the American economy because there would be great harm to China. But we have to be careful how we proceed with China, because they do hold a lot of the cards. Even this BlackRock deal right now, the Chinese are subjecting it to a regulatory review, and the Chinese have indirect cards. For instance, in Panama, even though the Panamanian president has agreed to this to end Belts and Roads Initiative, the Attorney General has found that the original concession given to the Hong Kong company was unconstitutional, and now they're moving, and this could tie up BlackRock's acquisition, and so we're entering a brave new world. I mean, there hasn't been an economic war on the scope and scale and with the complexity that exists between the United States and China. There's never been anything like this. We're entering into a brave new world, and therefore my normal analytical templates that I use, they don't apply because I don't have any. I don't think anybody has an analytical template for this one to predict an outcome. I just watch it with great interest.
Yeah, it seems like Trump is more keen to wage economic wars than actual military wars, which, my personal opinion, is better. At the end of the day, less bloodshed, hopefully. But any closing thoughts? Like, under the Trump administration, it's crazy the reverberation effect of a new administration has on a global scale. I mean, is it looking brighter now, or would we have been better under Kamala, in your opinion? Is the future hopeful for America? Are they going to regain their glory days, or is it going to be status quo? What do you envision?
I'm somebody that has watched America devolve for decades. We've been heading in the wrong direction for a long time. Economically, again, I'm not an economist, but this concept of debt compression. We were looking at the debt going from 136 to 154 almost overnight if something isn't done. So, and nobody was doing anything. None of the previous governments, Democrat or Republican, were doing anything that solved the debt compression issue. I was watching the United States head down the path towards inevitable nuclear war with Russia. Had Kamala Harris won this election, I believe that we would have been engaged in a global ending nuclear conflict with Russia by this summer over Ukraine, because she would have doubled down and put Russia in a corner, and there would have been a nuclear exchange, etc. So I think America needed to change trajectory. The problem is Trump the right trajectory? That's the $1 million question. On the issue of nuclear war with Russia, I believe that we dodged a bullet. That no matter what, we're not going to see Donald Trump going to nuclear war with Vladimir Putin. That both sides understand that is not a desired outcome. So that's a big relief. That means I get to enjoy my summer vacation. But what we need to also realize is that this isn't his first rodeo. He did this before, and he failed. And Trump admits it. He says, I was not prepared to be president. I became president and I had no idea what I was doing, so I had to bring in people from the establishment who are the deep state, and I got betrayed and I got boxed in and all this kind of stuff. And it led to a failed first term. Now Trump's president. He says he's learned a lot of lessons, and this is reflected in the dramatic changes he's doing. Trump knows that what he calls the deep state, this unelected bureaucratic blob in Washington, D.C., is the enemy. And that if he's going to succeed in any of these policy changes, these transformational policies, he has to dismantle the deep state, which he's doing right now. I mean, he is, through Elon Musk and Doge and things of that nature, he is dismantling this bureaucratic state. Whether he's doing it the right way or the wrong way, I don't know. But all I know is that we are in a revolution in the United States. This isn't your normal presidential transition. This is revolutionary change that's taking place domestically and globally. And I just think people need to understand that this is not business as usual. This is not, the normal state of chaotic American politics at play, that we are in a transitional moment in American history and global history. Donald Trump's presidency comes at a time when America is transitioning away from being the global hegemon to an America that has to function in a multipolar world. And the interesting thing about Donald Trump is he recognizes that. He made campaign speech after campaign speech that said, the greatest threat to the United States is the United States, that we are doing things that, that we can't, we shouldn't continue to do. So that would be my final thought, is that as we move forward here, never forget for a moment that we're in the midst of a revolution. And it's a revolution that's going to change how America functions domestically and how we interact on the global stage, for better or for worse. I'm not saying, that I'm not applauding. I'm nervous. I'm nervous by this because it takes us down a path where, as I said, normal analytical templates no longer apply. And so now you're being compelled to look at something for the first time and trying to assess it, and and you're not able to fully understand the complexity because it's happening for the first time. It makes life interesting as an analyst, but it also makes life a little disconcerting because the normal predictive models just aren't there. The normal cause and effect relationships that one would be looking for as part of a predictive model aren't there because it's just a completely new thing. It's they say there's an old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. We've been cursed. We live in some of the most interesting times imaginable. Again, that's not a statement that says that I love everything that's happening or I hate everything that's happening. It says that what's happening is new, it's scary, it's interesting, and we're in for a hell of a ride.